Good evening, I'm John Carter. Welcome to Poland Daily. Former US President George Bush's funeral ceremony started today in Washington. Bush Sr. certainly had a big part to play, not only in the history of his own country, but also in Poland's. He, Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II played an important role in the fall of the Iron Curtain. However, not all those involved in combating communism lived up to their legend today. Lech Wałęsa, the former president of Poland, decided to use Bush's funeral to push his political agenda.
George Bush was one of the youngest pilots serving in the US Air Force during the Second World War. He was shot down in the Pacific Theater by a Japanese anti-aircraft gun, but survived. After the war, Bush graduated from Yale and quickly joined his father in the oil business. He started his political career in the 1960s, later serving as the US ambassador of the UN and as the head of the CIA. In the 80s, he held the position of vice president throughout the Reagan administration.
The thing that I appreciated about him most is that he crossed the lines with the Democrats, and he became friends finally with Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton.
George Bush Sr.'s funeral ceremonies began at 5 p.m. in Washington, D.C. Among the guests were the current president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, and former president Lech Wałęsa. Unfortunately, the famous former leader of the Solidarity movement took the chance to push his own political agenda and decided to wear a t-shirt emblazoned with the word Konstytucja or Constitution as a sign of protest against the alleged breaking of the rule of law in Poland. Many onlookers perceived the move as at best inappropriate. A funeral is a funeral. It's a sad ceremony, and it's also a funeral of no ordinary man, but of a great president of the United States who helped Poland a lot. I remember how he came to Poland in 1989 just to meet with Wałęsa, and we were very moved by this event. America is still coping with his loss. That's why I think that pushing any political agenda during such a ceremony is really inappropriate.
Cisnął piętno na całej polityce zagranicznej w tamtych latach.
Aż trudno na poważnie traktować jego zachowanie.
It's hard to treat Wałęsa seriously. He first asked the serving president Andrzej Duda to travel with him on a plane to the United States, and then he used this situation to focus attention on himself, on his shirt. It's unprofessional, inappropriate and just childish.
To infantylne, niepoważne, głupie.
When asked about his t-shirt by journalists in Washington, D.C., the former Polish president responded in his style by saying that if Poland doesn't become fully free and respectful of the separation of powers, then he wishes the shirt to accompany him to his grave.
The Ministers of Defence, Health, Justice and Interior have summarised the last 3 years of the Law and Justice rule in their respective fields. Their reports show that the so-called good change of rule in Poland can be seen in effect from the progress within their various departments.
Last Saturday, the Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki summed up the 3 years under the Law and Justice government. Meanwhile, today, Minister of Defence Mariusz Błaszczak stated during a press conference that his aim was to modernize and increase the size of the Polish military. The minister also seeks to solidify the national army within the structures of NATO, particularly in relations with the United States of America. Today we can say with all certainty that thanks to the combined efforts of my predecessor Antoni Macierewicz and I, we have managed to achieve more in 3 years than the previous coalition did in their 8 years in power. Speaking about his department, the Minister of Justice and Prosecutor General Zbigniew Ziobro mentioned the judiciary reform. In his view, it can only be judged once it is fully implemented. It remains to be seen whether the full implementation of the reform will be possible during the Law and Justice Party's term in power. The judicial reform is a very contentious issue. It was met with opposition from the judges, especially the ones who previously had an enormous amount of privileges, the ones that called themselves the extraordinary caste. The Minister of Health, Professor Łukasz Szumowski, and the Minister of Internal Affairs and Administration, Joachim Brudziński, also summarized the department's work over the last 3 years. The summaries of the remaining departments will continue in the coming days.
Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, gave Russia 60 days to comply with the elimination of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, known as INF. If Moscow does not accept this condition, the United States will definitely withdraw from the INF Treaty. President Putin's response to this ultimatum leaves no doubt that the new arms race will come into effect.
That's not an agreement. That's just self-restraint. And it strategically no longer made sense to remain in that position, and we'll develop our course forward. I don't want to say much about what the United States policy is going to be, because there are lots of folks still to talk to. And I will also leave to the Department of Defense the nature and work that they're doing on systems that will ultimately potentially be non-compliant.
The American side had first announced that they intend to leave the treaty on intermediate-range missiles, and only then started to look for a justification as to why they had no choice but to do it. And their main justification is that we are in violation of something. And as usual, they show no proof of violation. The decision was made a while ago, but it was done quietly. They thought we wouldn't notice it, but the development of these missiles is already in the Pentagon budget, and they only publicly announced the exit afterward.
Thank you very much for joining me here this evening at Poland Daily. I'm John Carter. Stay tuned after the break for Poland Daily Weather, and then join me after that for Poland Daily Business.